Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, host of the Football History Dude podcast, right here on the Sports History Network. Now, before we jump into another sports history adventure, let me tell you about this episode's sponsor. We partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get deals on over 30,000 autographed sports collectibles. They even have film, music, and other entertainment autographs on the site, so there's something for everyone. Perhaps you're looking for a gift for Mother's Day, or maybe Father's Day. Heck, who needs a holiday as an excuse to give a piece of sports history to your loved ones? Or how about yourself? Today seems like a great day to add to your sports cave, right? But how is RSA able to offer such great deals on JSA authentication, you ask? Well, they do this by making deals directly with athletes, so there are no extra markups, and they choose to pass these savings on to the customer. All orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and money-back guarantee. And to make sure RSA knows that the Sports History Network sent you, we created a special link for you. All you have to do is head to shoprsa.com/SHN. Again, that's shoprsa.com/SHN. Head over there to get your piece of sports history today.
This is our league. And this is your league. From the 55-yard line on CFL America Radio and the Sports History Network.
From the 55-yard line, welcome to Gridiron America, and I am sitting here tonight with a voice if you listen to sports history podcasts out there, it's a voice that you're going to know very well. It is Tim Hanlon from Good Seats Still Available. Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Greg, and greetings and salutations to you all the way out there in southern Japan. How's it going?
It's good. It is spring has arrived here in Okayama. And it's going to be about 60 degrees today. Sunny out. I can feel the sun here beating in through the office window. And, pretty soon here in Japan, it's all we're going to be watching and talking is baseball. So I am definitely not complaining, and it's nice to be able to talk to it. You're back in my old you're in my stomping grounds, actually kitty corner from one of my favorite restaurants when I did my reserve duty up by there by the lakeshore. And it feels good to talk to you knowing you're back in Chicago, though I don't envy the cold.
No, and we're going to get 6 to 12 inches of snow as we record this in about 2 days. So you're not missing that, I'm sure.
Oh, and it is election day in Chicago, too, on top of that.
It is. And as we're recording this, I'm actually seeing the results as they come in. 53% of the precincts are reporting, but I'm not going to tip you off just yet. You got to keep listening if you want to find out.
Yeah. And for anybody asking, just real quickly before we get into our conversation, unfortunately, Scott is not able to join us for this conversation tonight. He had a death in the family. But as I've said to everybody, you will be hearing from Scott here soon. But with time changes, family stuff, and everything, it's been hard to really work our schedule. So our condolences going out to Scott and his family. Hey, Tim, I have listened to your podcast for literally years now, and you are probably you're one of several people who are responsible for me doing what I do now with history podcasts and everything. And let me ask you, how did your podcast start? How did it come about for you to say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Let's do it.
Interesting. Nice of you to say. God knows why you continue to listen. But it's I appreciate it nonetheless.
Must listen radio, my friend. That's what I'm
for a certain type of listener. Let's be honest. I mean, It is kind of an acquired taste. I'll be certainly, I'm very self-aware when it comes to that. How did it come together? A bit of a confluence of stuff. So number one, my sort of day job is in the media and advertising and technology fields. We run a consultancy and advisory firm in Chicago that's been around for almost 10 years now. We kind of focus on early stage technologies and innovations around media and television and streaming and that kind of stuff, do investments and all that kind of thing. And previously was in the advertising and media agency space. So I'm always interested professionally around new approaches to media and technologies and stuff. And podcasting was a thing on that radar 2016, 2017. So professionally, some interest in learning what the heck this thing is, how it works. Could I do it too? And then if I could do it, what could I actually do it about? Right. Because everybody and his brother seem to be doing a podcast about something.
Right.
Enter in sort of a confluence number two, which is a former life before being in the media and advertising space in journalism. In college, I was an intern at Sports Illustrated. I was an intern at CBS News, worked at CBS News for a couple of years after college. I worked at Voice of America through college as a paying gig, overnights on the weekends. That really helped the social life. Envisioned sort of a media and or journalism kind of career. Right. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that sort of didn't fully pan out years later, but luckily, I think. But a gift for gab, I guess. Always enjoyed the radio growing up. That was sort of my first media love.
Yeah.
And podcasting is probably the closest thing to that. Then enter in confluence or concentric circle number three. And this is more topical. As many listeners of our silly little show may know, the youth of yours truly was professionally sports oriented around a fledgling soccer league known as the NASL, North American Soccer League. And I grew up in the northern New Jersey area, and the New York Cosmos were not only a thing there regionally or nationally, but internationally. They were a white hot cosmic moment in time for a number of years. Gigantic crowds and all that kind of stuff. And that made a lasting imprint on me. I was season ticket holder with my parents and all that kind of stuff. And it was just fun, enjoyable. I loved every minute of it. And then in a few years, it was gone.
Right.
And that sort of defunctness, forgottenness, somehow made a lasting impact on me. And it intrigued me, right? So indoor soccer teams and the original USFL. And I remember vaguely this thing called World Team Tennis. And what are this ABA red, white, and blue basketball thing? Well, what was that all about? And on and on and on and on. And even as I grew up, arguably some have said that I have not grown up yet, but that's okay.
Nothing wrong with that.
They continue to make more, right? I mean,
right.
Here we are sitting on the eve of the third weekend of the third incarnation of the XFL. And in a couple of months, the second incarnation of the USFL. And so the fascination for me has always been around pro sports and defunctness and previous incarnations and stuff. I think it's born from that, but to me, it's just like, it's a history pursuit. It's sports. And it's, I don't know. And it didn't seem to be covered by anybody.
And I'm just like you. I mean, I know we're, pretty much the same age, and we also grew up on, you remember back in school, getting those Scholastic book order forms. And I would get all the football and baseball ones. And I'm sure you were, the same thing. And so that's, but yeah, I'm like you when, the USFL, I mean, I started, I didn't have, for me growing up, I didn't have that experience of having my favorite team go away. But at the same time, I mean, I followed everything. And so like you, I've always had that I love reading these histories. I mean, I'm sitting right now with a book that I know I don't know if you have in your library, but I'm sure I know you've read While the Getting's Good by Herb Gluck.
Sitting on my shelf up on my shoulder, which you cannot see.
Ah,
Right next door to the $1 League by Bill Burr.
It's funny you should mention that because when we moved to Japan, there were certain books that were coming with me, and this one and the $1 League came with me. And I dare not tell my wife how much I paid for these books.
I will admit, though, my prized possession is a very well-worn, but still in very good condition copy of the quote-unquote memoir biography of, still with us, Gary Davidson, called Breaking the Game Wide Open.
Wow.
And I will tell you, it's a book worth getting. It's probably about $50 on eBay and Amazon and stuff. And we still have a very slight chance of getting Gary.
Okay.
In a couple of months' time, let's hope.
Right.
But you must read that book and add that to your collection. It is about the best approximation of the confidence / arrogance of Gary Davidson at the time. Frankly, I think needed in both measures to be or the brain of at least 3 challenger leagues to the system.
Right.
I think you should get that book for your collection as well.
I will try. And it's funny you should mention that, because when I moved, when I was getting rid of books and trying to figure out what I was taking, archive.org has a lot of these books, including Gluck's book, including the $1 League. For those who can't, obviously are looking for a copy, a lot of these books have been digitized now and are available for checkout at archive.org. And that's a shameless plug on my part, because without them, I'd be very unhappy with it. It would have been really hard to part with my books. But when I knew they were available on archive.org, I'd be like, okay, I can give it away. So yeah, I will definitely check that one out.
You do bring up something, though. I don't mean to go a tangent here, but there is somebody who, and I don't know who this person's name is. I need to go back into my archives and look it up. It's not somebody we've had on the show, but this person digitized media guides from the World Hockey Association. And I think kind of as a, if you will, public service. And then
right,
for some reason, I guess he found some of the commentary or the behaviors sort of unbecoming and kind of pulled them off and stuff. There's another sort of angle, I think, of sports history that really has yet to be done sort of en masse. And that is doing that for current teams and their past histories and their media guides, back when media guides were a thing. I mean, for those of a certain age, you may not remember, but like if you're growing up in the 70s and 80s watching these teams and stuff, I will tell you, one of the earliest symptoms of my malady was writing to every single North American and American soccer league, and then MISL, indoor soccer league team. This is the day when you actually wrote letters and you mailed them to all these teams saying, could you please send me information about your team?
Really?
And I would spend the entire summer going to my mailbox and waiting. Wow. And sure enough, I would get, sometimes it'd be sort of things, maybe a sticker or certainly something on letterhead.
Yeah.
So I'd get these packages with like pennants and programs and media guides and stuff. And it was like, and I did it like for 5 years, I think it was, from like ages 8 through whatever. And, but that was but those guides, those media guides, I mean, again, you have to remember late 70s, early 80s,
right?
You had the small agate, kind of stuff in the newspaper, maybe the scores, and something like the North American Soccer League wasn't even covered all that well. Even in New York, it was good, but it wasn't wasn't comprehensive. But man, oh man, I would obsess with some of those, and I've parted with a lot of those over time, and some of them got a pretty penny, but I love that stuff because that's like sitting in the press box, right? And that's like that literally is probably the richest albeit promotional history you're going to find of some of these teams and stuff. Frankly, some of the only history you'll find.
Right. I mean, I know
Whoever's doing that now, please do it. Keep doing it.
Oh, before I left, I got a package in the mail. Before I left the States, I got a package in the mail, and it came from Canada. In it was media guides from the US CFL USA expansion, and it was a treasure trove.
Oh,
And I
Las
got
Vegas Posse.
Yes, and right, I sent all those. Those are sitting in California right now, waiting to come over here. But it was just amazing, just a treasure. I'm like, yeah, but yeah, they don't. Do they even do media guides anymore? Or is it just all online?
I don't think so. I think they're all either online PDFs, and they tend to be much more. I think they're more voluminous and more interactive. With links to stats.
Right.
Certainly a whole lot more comprehensive. But man, those media guides works of art.
Yeah, but yeah, it's like it's just that the feel of the paper, the reading. I mean, I love libraries. I love books. And just I mean. To feel the book, even with the book on the World Football League, you're just sitting here. It's just like, wow. I don't know. There's just something about it. I mean, and that's I very much am missing having a library that I can go to here in Japan and sit and check books out from. I mean, I know.
Yeah, but you also don't want to be a hoarder, and
that's what I turned into be. That was the problem.
Well, I purposefully while I'm fascinated with all this stuff and I love the history of it and stuff, I mean, people think or assume that I've got a trove of stuff. And I would say maybe to the extent of media guides, maybe 10, 15 years ago, certainly for soccer, I would say the answer was at the time, yes. Did I have an eBay problem back in the late 90s? Yeah. I mean, but there's a point at which it was like, enough is enough. And with the internet, a lot of stuff winds up online. You can kind of access as long as you know where to find it. There's plenty of gaps still left, friends. So don't worry about it. I mean, I would say there's still, I think there's footage out there of various things that are just sitting in somebody's attic.
Yeah.
An estate or yard sale away that we'll discover. But I will say that the whole sort of media guide thing and all that kind of stuff, it just conjures up memories and sometimes your eyebrows get severely raised when you see some of the stories and the people and people that actually now and what they were doing when they were really young. It's just fascinating stuff.
Yeah. It just takes you back to a time and place. And it's like, I mean, I don't have to explain it to you, but to try to explain it to somebody else that isn't into sports history or, just didn't grow up a sports fan going, I don't know. I mean, I love music and I really get into music. So when the Cubs won the World Series, there were a few songs out there, Eddie Vedder's All the Way, and there's another song out there that when I listened to it, man, it just took me back to childhood, sitting in front of a TV watching Channel 9. I'm like, I don't know. I can't. Yeah. It's magical. And it's, and the guests that you've had on your show, and I know before we recorded here, I mentioned it, but your conversation with Larry Zonka that you had, that was in the last couple months here. My wife came in and she's like, hey, I go, no, I'm listening. I gotta hear this conversation. But it was and you talked to Larry for what, good hour?
About an hour. He was very generous with his time. Yeah. But he's a great example of the kind of guests that we strive for, but frankly, it's as a part-time enterprise.
Yeah.
And not a hugely remunerative one at that. So it's a passion project, right? So but I am the best guests. That's not true. One type of best guest is original eyes and ears, people who were there and in the midst of all of it. So I think some of our best interviews have been with actual participants, people who were there in the room or on the field or doing the stuff.
Right.
And it actually, those are I think, even more heartfelt conversations, because you can get deeper, and you can kind of talk about sort of like what their state of mind was at the time, or what they were thinking, or and the more you sort of kind of just poke, it becomes more revelatory, right? There's less, guarded sort of, and Larry is a really good example. I mean, this is a guy, for those who don't know or remember, I mean, he was essentially one of the elite players in the NFL, along with his pal Jim Kick, and God, boy, who's the other guy? I can't remember. There were three. Mercury Morris, and they were riding high because they were the undefeated Miami Dolphins Super Bowl winning team. They were, and Larry and Jim in particular, although I think Mercury Morris was kind of in the mix for a period of time, literally became the the Gordie Howe, WHA version for the WFL, the sort of the go-to rule book, if you will, of Challenger League. Find big talent, pay him a whopping amount of money, and instant credibility.
Yeah.
And of course, it didn't play out all that way. But when I saw that he was putting out a book, I mean, you're always looking for excuses to find these people as well. Right?
Yeah.
And some people will be very generous with their time because they love to go down memory lane. Other people don't necessarily either want to remember some of these exploits or foibles,
right?
Or have not gotten over them. We've certainly gotten into some of those kinds of things. But either way, those first person memories are like gold in my mind.
And also,
I'm sorry. And they're also the more recent ones, right? So the things from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and onwards, right? There's a greater propensity of having those people still alive with us. Now, as you go back in time, no less fascinating stories, but they tend to be more history projects. And that's where it gets a little harder to kind of divine, but you certainly can get a lot more either accurate or through the lens of history, a little bit more, comprehensive, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I mean, for instance, a lot of these people that are associated with these leagues are aging out, are passing away. And, Upton Bell, great example. Great example. And you and I both know Upton. And when we interviewed him, it was fascinating. A first-person account. I mean, we learned so much, and he was so generous of his time, and I know he was with you. To hear him talk and to give that, okay, this is actually how it happened. Like, okay, that it runs counter to any, but Upton was there. He knows, and I was trying to get Bud Grant to come on the show, and and Upton said, he's like, he goes, a lot of us old guys are aging out. You gotta get us while you can get us at this point. So,
I agree. It's really important. I mean, in some respects, it's almost like you want to. So I was a big fan of Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal podcast. And anybody who knows of Gilbert Gottfried, the famous comedian, just recently passed away about 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. He and his cohort, Frank Santopadre, have been doing a podcast. I don't know, it was around the same time that I started, maybe two earlier. Mm-hmm. And the whole zeitgeist of that was old showbiz history and people and all that kind of stuff. And, they would lament that, they were this close to getting they got Ed Asner, but, this close to getting a certain person or two. And they died the next week and stuff. And they really wanted to get some of these stories essentially memorialized. And I kind of feel a little bit like that here too.
Yeah.
Although I don't have I wish I had more of a financial cushion to do it more full time, but I got to tell you the Upton Bell's a great example. I mean, tremendous conversation. We probably should have him back, but I mean, this is a guy who somehow saved the New York Stars WFL franchise and brought it to new life, and actually was in the vanguard because he was exploring Charlotte for the first time. And now look at Charlotte, just a major metropolitan area with buses and sports. But he was also the conduit to us getting John Sterling, the New York Yankees broadcaster, still going strong at 80 something years old, who I remember as a kid growing up in New York as somewhat of a smart ass sports talk guy, arguably the the father of sports talk in New York City back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
But John Sterling, I didn't know this. He was the voice of the New York Stars for the 4 games that they
Oh,
played.
wow. I didn't
And
know
then that led me down a rabbit hole. I found audio and stuff. And John Sterling had a memory like a trap. He's like, oh, yeah, I remember we were caught in Hawaii and then the league folded. I'm like, what? I mean, this is like, wow, keep going. This is great. And he's also a broadcaster, so he wouldn't stop. And it's like, that's gold too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, more of that, please.
Yeah, you hit the record button and you're like, take us away. And it, Upton, same way. We press the record button and Scott and I were just like, this was gold. This was perfect. And it was one of our first podcasts too. And we just to this day, in fact, I was texting Upton the other day. Just a very giving man, a very generous man. And even when my wife and I were in Boston, we were planning on going to visit him, but COVID got in the way. But him and I talked every day. I've noticed that when you do these podcasts, at least on these are people you get to know in the short time you interview them, but then also the conversation tends to carry on later on, whether it be through social media. Facebook is a great example. I'm Facebook friends with a lot of the guests that we do. So, but it's when you're, how are you able, because you get some great guests. What's the process that goes in? Is it a weekly thing? How hard do you work on getting the guests? Because you put out a show at least twice a week, correct?
No, it's we've tried to adhere to a once a week kind of schedule. I must
okay, or what? Twice? I'm sorry, once a week.
No,
because I was thinking.
Yeah, one thing I kind of made a promise to myself with, and this is just learning about podcasting in general, was, do your best to kind of stick to a regular schedule, right? So it becomes a habit for people,
right?
And for some people, for some entities, that's monthly or biweekly. For me, weekly seemed to be a good cadence. I will tell you, occasionally there are weeks where you wonder if you're going to be if it's going to happen, or you have to bend the time a little bit, or sometimes an interview doesn't go the right way, or, we've had a few some interviews we've had, we just haven't used because they just weren't all that great. But it's hard because you make that commitment. And as my wife will tell you, after doing this for almost 7 years now, she's like, give yourself a break, take a week off. Like, well, it's not all that simple to do, but the good news is because we've been doing this for so long, I now have a decent library where, people from 6 or 7 years ago may not have heard our initial interview with Kyle Rote Jr., our episode number 10, and who remembers the superstars and the Dallas Tornado, the NSL, that kind of stuff. So we'll throw that back in, and it's newish, and for those souls who have not braved or treaded down the dungeon of the archives, or as Steve Dahl used to say, the descent into the archives.
For those outside of Chicago who don't know who Steve Dahl is, very famous Chicago radio personality.
But the concept there is not to go to the well too much, but like this week we rebroadcast our XFL interview with Brett Forrest, who wrote, I think, really the only book of any substance around the original version of the XFL.
There's actually, there's actually 2 books. There's Brett's, and Brett it was perfect timing with you putting that out, because he just re-released that book.
Yeah, an audio version as well.
The Long Bomb, which is a fascinating and honest take on what happened. And we're going to get into the XFL stuff here in a little bit. But yeah, that was one of the first interviews that I listened to on your show. Was that because I think I just read the book, and I got it, like, holy, it was a fascinating interview with him. But there's also another book. The name of the book is, the title was, and I quote, "It Was Football, Stupid," which is another good book, and I forget the name of the author. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, but in terms of process, I also try to look for hooks, right? So it's either personal connections or ideas that I see, or stories or anniversaries, some other kinds of hooks. I'll I'll be honest, people writing books or putting out movies and stuff doesn't hurt. Those tend to be convenient excuses. Not in all cases. I mean, Billie Jean King had a book out last year. Still can't get her. She's got a book coming out later this year. Still working on getting her. I want to talk about World Team Tennis. Billie Jean, if you're listening, we're here for you. The original World Team Tennis in the 70s.
Yeah.
Let's talk. Yeah, I mean, you have to find, and then persistence. I mean, I've had plenty of people who I'm still trying to chase after a couple of years. I'll have a fleeting text from them, or somebody will say they're interested, or, I've been on the case of Jeannie Buss for 2.5 years now, and we've texted, and it comes and it goes, and I'm leery because the Lakers aren't in the playoffs yet this year.
Right.
It's very delicate, right? So, but you keep trying, and ordinarily they'll come. So persistence and fear, frankly. I want to get something out each week of quality.
Well, you do. I mean, the thing is, you do a great job. So it's like, I don't know, you make it look easy. You really do. I mean, I listen, seen the guests, man. I've dug in through the archives. I'm like, oh, it's like.
But Greg, I will say this though. I mean, listen, I'm going to be frank. I mean, this is an acquired taste, right? I mean, it's
right.
Sometimes I will tell people what I do, and I almost am embarrassed to kind of say, not embarrassed. It's just I know that my passion for this particular topic is not the same passion that other people have.
Right.
I do find that most people generically can at least warm up to the topic, and I can kind of sense quickly in conversation whether it's worth going down the rabbit hole with or not.
Right.
By saying, hey, where'd you grow up? Okay. Do you fancy yourself a sports fan when you were growing up, or where you're from? Hey, do you remember? And I'll throw in an obligatory defunct team and see if it brings a memory or two. If it does, then I say, okay, that's kind of what we focus on, are those kinds of stories, leagues, teams, events, situations, pro stuff that doesn't exist anymore. And we go deep and we love it, and we learn a whole ton.
Yeah. I mean, it's part, you and I are part of a small tribe.
Yeah, 8 times out of 10, it'll be like, okay, that's interesting. 2 times out of 10, it's like, oh my God, do you remember X or Y? And then usually we go off and have a couple of brews, and there you go.
Right.
But yeah, I will say, well, here's one last thing, and I'll shut up. It's also kind of like a roulette wheel.
Right.
Right. Because just because we're doing a topic this week, right, it may not hit your fancy. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're not a hockey fan, or you could care less about, a minor league or an indoor soccer league that wasn't the MISL or even the MISL. But, if you stick around the week after, next week, we might talk about the XFL or the World Football League or the World League of American Football, or some team that almost was a franchise but never was, like the Miami Screaming Eagles of the World Hockey Association, et cetera.
Oh, wow. There's a name I haven't heard in like forever.
But so, I mean, for the it's a niche of a niche, right? So the niche of defunct teams and leagues that you or I might be interested in because we grew up there, or it's a sport we love, or whatever we have memories of, or pennants of, or programs from, et cetera, or times with our parents when we went to go to games, or it's even a smaller subset of that. Yeah. It's a percentage of a percentage who care about like the defunctness overall. I think Scott is one of those guys.
Yes.
I am definitely one of those guys. You may or may not be. I certainly am.
I am fully there with you guys. I am on the same boat with you guys, and happy to be there, because it brings maybe the term, I guess, is visceral feeling. Just able to be a kid again. I mean, you can't see my, you can't see my my jerseys in my closet, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And it's just, I look at it's just a way to be young, I guess. And I guess it's just, as we get older, you and I see people that our age that are way older than what we are. And I'm not talking physically, but I'm just talking mentally. I mean, I think you and I have not forgotten, and nor has Scott, and most people that are listening have not forgotten that feeling of what it feels like to be a kid again. And to me, the defunct leagues, the history keeps that feeling alive.
Yeah. And, I would say it's also, I think in the beginning maybe it was more nostalgia and an anticipation of folly.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certainly healthy doses of that, right? There's all kinds of craziness to attempt these kinds of stories and leagues and teams and what you were thinking and the frivolity and the whimsy and the situations and the, sometimes even legal troubles of these kinds of situations. But I will say it's become over time, actually fairly quickly, more of an exploration and just a curiosity hunt.
Yeah.
I kind of also say it's not just sports history, but it's really also pop culture because one, I find that to be part and parcel of it, right?
Right.
Sports is pop culture. And as a side component to that, it's also kind of a snapshot or review of what was going on in said time period in this country or in that city or in that sport. And that to me reveals whole bunches of other things.
Yeah.
And the overlap becomes really intriguing when some of these stories, I want to say meld together, but they become almost cross-pollinations of each other, right? Yeah. So we were lucky to have for 2 episodes, the late great Dennis Murphy, right? This is a guy who alongside, maybe Gary Davidson, was probably the most important and unsung figure in American sports history, in that he was Dennis Murphy, and then to a lesser extent, a bit, maybe similar to Gary Davidson. This was a guy who, he was a hustler for sure. He was a promoter for sure, but he's the guy that was either wholly or partially responsible for at least 4 different challenger leagues, if not more. I've seen his name associated with all kinds of other stuff, but the American Basketball Association, the World Hockey Association, he was part of the WFL back in the early days, Roller Hockey International in the 90s, got Jeannie Buss her start.
That's the one I was like, when you count, I'm like, wait a minute, there's a 4th? I didn't know that one. I didn't know about the roller.
But he was also apparently part of World Team Tennis for a few moments.
Okay.
And a whole bunch of, and Lord knows the other things that never got off the ground.
Yeah.
I think he was involved in, there's other stuff, but just the font of creativity and the balls, I'll just say it, to kind of just do it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Right. Gary Davidson similarly is to me, it's just endlessly fascinating. Is it a product of the 70s, that period of time? Yeah, maybe. I think if there is a book or a movie to be had in this realm, I would focus on the 70s. And it's probably the greatest concentration, maybe save for today, because of private equity money and ESPN Ocho, right? Of new sports, new leagues, and just going for it and see what happens. The International Volleyball Association, we had a great conversation with the guy who did the documentary. Was on ESPN for a minute. It was actually a half hour. But Wilt Chamberlain, the co-ed volleyball, the International Volleyball Association was a thing for a good 3 or 4 years. And the reason I remembered it is because Sports Illustrated would always have it in the agate in the For the Record section. So I knew it was real because I would always look there to see, is it still around? Because in New York, we didn't know from anything about this international, but in Tucson, it was a big deal. In Denver, it was a huge deal. Yeah. In El Paso, it was a big deal.
Well,
and
it's
Wilt Chamberlain was part of it. And Barry Gordy was part of the ownership group. Barry Diller was part of the ownership group of the league. Soon to be under the Reagan administration, Donald Regan, the Treasury Secretary, was part of that. And Wilt Chamberlain was commissioner.
This is a whole story I've never heard. About the volleyball. I've just not until now. I didn't know that. I did not know that.
That's why we exist.
Yes. Well, it's funny because here in Japan, we actually have a pro volleyball team. At least here, it's my wife's like, we should go. I'm like, yeah, we can go to pro. It's women's pro volleyball. So I'm like, yeah, let's go to women's pro volleyball. Love to see it.
Well, for those who are listening, and if you care, episode 9, Mike Jacobs He's the guy who did the documentary about the International Volleyball Association.
Yeah.
We have episode number 138, Jay Hanseth, who was a major player in that league. And we even talk about Wilt Chamberlain's stuff in episode 217 with the biographer Robert Cherry. And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
All this stuff keeps coming back, right? History doesn't repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes.
Right. Well,
and yeah, I was gonna say, and on the football front, we see that now, but there are now 4 apparently to launch professional volleyball leagues. 2 of them supposedly co-ed, which the IVA was.
Yeah.
So these ideas are not necessarily new; they just keep coming around again. And that's fascinating to me because people don't learn lessons, and they think they could do it better.
Well, and that kind of segues into talking about where we're at now with the XFL and the history lessons. And you probably are like me when you're sitting there, you're reading about, well, we'll just use we'll use the XFL because it's the easiest example to use. And you sit there and you see everything play out and you're like, I've seen this movie before. I know how this is going to end. And in the social media and the Twitter sphere, there's so much spin, but yet it doesn't seem like people have either learned from history or even read a history book. So what are your thoughts on that?
So, I think it's interesting that the name still exists. But it's also not unlike the USFL, and it's a different sort of story there. But
right.
I think the idea of spring football that the USFL, from what I've learned in history, did not pioneer it, but it certainly probably was the best perfection of the idea of spring football.
Right.
It really filled a void back in the early 80s. And we know why and how that sort of story fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought that spring football could indeed work if it were given the proper foundation, certainly the right investment, and frankly, the appropriate place on the big dinner table, largely set and food created by the NFL, right? So the kids call it a kids table, call it the dessert, or call it the whatever.
Right.
And the USFL, should never have tried to quote unquote challenge the NFL. Could it have coexisted as a spring league of high, if not maybe on a certain occasion, equal quality? I think maybe, yeah. I'm not sure we're in a place right now where that could happen today. The NFL has just gotten so much more gargantuan, right? But I do look at spring football still pretty much a thing and a void that can be filled. And I will tell you, we can argue about the quality of play. We can talk about the AAF. We can talk about the second version of the XFL. But the rules innovations, are persistent through all of those.
Right.
And some of them have leaked into the NFL already. And I think a bunch more are ready, willing, and able to be done as for sure. Again, as well. I think there's some really innovative things there that are not kitschy, that actually could improve the quality of play overall in the NFL and maybe save a few lives down the road too.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I know with, the thing with all of these, and I explain to people, I go, is as much as you want to maybe, say this is going to fail, I don't really consider it a failure if something is learned from the league and made and put into place elsewhere. The first XFL brought us to SkyCam, changed the way of looking at the game. And I can't remember any other innovations off the top of my head, but then you had other leagues come in, and now with this third version, the way they're doing kickoffs and the way they're doing extra points, I like. This is good the quality of play is not great, but it's only 2 weeks in. It'll improve as these guys gel and everything. So to me, it's never been a quality of play. And the rules innovations have been great, but where I always tell people where it all falls apart is on the business end. And have any of, I mean, do you, I mean, with the XFL, I mean, first off, to me, when I see XFL, I equate it with failure. And I don't know why that is when there have been, it was a success in the sense it did bring about rules innovation. I don't know. I'm just, I like what I'm seeing with the current XFL, but as we know, the ratings came out today, people really aren't watching. I mean, do you see that? Do you see that changing? Do you see is there an appetite for spring football? I guess I'm kind of lost for words on this one.
No,
I don't know.
I think there's definitely an appetite. Now, again, I think you have to, there are a couple of things that are different even since the second version, right? One is betting.
Yeah.
I mean, for better or for worse, everything is gambleable now.
Right.
In most states, right? That didn't even exist in the second go around, right? So, it gives people who are inclined to do that on a regular basis, regardless of the reasons or the specifics of the gambling, more stuff for the funnel to consider to bet against.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, so that'll add some level of intrigue and interest and stuff. But I do think, though, that I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised. The XFL has meaning to it, right? I think the second version, was a kinder, gentler version, right? And it was almost sort of a redemption play.
Yeah.
For McMahon, right? To kind of like legitimize it.
Right.
But what was not lost, though, was sort of the challenger mentality and the idea of bettering the game somehow, some way. And I love that. That's what Danny Garcia and Dwayne Johnson have done. And I also appreciate the fact that they took the XFL logo and made it their own and that kind of stuff, right? They really have stripped away as much of the McMahon essence as they could, while keeping enough of the verve and the intent, I guess, of what the brashness, I guess, of what an XFL could be.
Okay.
And I have to give them a bit of an edge going into the rest of this season, especially when the USFL comes into play in April, because they're at least in the markets, right? I love the idea that they're centralizing the teams and the practices, and then they're flying to these markets, but they're in the markets. Now, I would not have chosen some of the venues.
Yeah.
Because I think some of them are too big, right?
Right.
And it gets a little embarrassing, I think, on the football, on the television front, but
the aesthetics of it.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's product for television, right? That's really, but I do think there is something, and it will take a while to, but the USFL I know is incrementally, right? I mean, they did everything in Birmingham last year with the exception of the final. But I like the idea that they're actually going to regionalize those games, at least into 4 markets.
Yeah.
I just think the XFL, I think, has done a good job of shedding its previous skin, right? The USFL, I know and see why Fox Sports and Eric Shanks and friends did this. It was opportunistic. It was buying assets from the Spring League and kind of bolting on some nostalgia atop of it with the USFL original names and teams. But it feels a bit stretched to me to bring all those former league teams and those names into the mix. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But I do think that places like San Antonio and St. Louis, again, point XFL for getting into those markets again and ASAP, because there was real traction there, both the AAF and the XFL in those markets.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that first, one of the first AAF games I watched was the Commanders game. And it was, the CFL would have killed to have crowds like that in San Antonio, back in the 90s when the Texans played there for that one season. So, yeah.
I mean, I also think too, we're now in an age of streaming, which is also something that's really come into its own, even since the last XFL, the 2020 or so. It's really become truly mainstreamed, if you will.
Right.
And as we've seen with Formula One, boring to watch. Sorry, hate to tell you, it's not. But if I've watched the documentary on Netflix, I at least know the storylines, and that's
right.
That could be a really interesting way to get people interested in stuff and build. So look, I think give it some time.
Right.
If they're around for 3 years and the USFL can last for a third or fourth year, I mean, Fox is it's cheap programming for everybody involved. And it fills time. Getting 700,000 or 1 million viewers and selling some advertising and some sponsorship stuff around that, it's better than break even probably. And if we're lucky, the two of them probably merge into something stronger, and they'll pick the best markets, and they will be what they probably should be. And that is, call it developmental, call it the second chance, call it a minor league, call it a partner of the NFL, call it a rules, a place to experiment like minor league baseball has done with Major League Baseball.
Right.
Knowing its role and coordinating it, it could make football, pro football, the NFL maybe led version of pro football, a year-round sport.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I didn't even really kind of think it in that way, even though it's right there in front of me. I just really hadn't seen it until you really brought it up. But yeah, both these leagues could very well just be, a laboratory, an NFL kind of blessed, or maybe, but the question is at what point does the NFL, do they partner? I mean, that's like, it's the 500-pound gorilla in the room. The NFL seems to, the NFL doesn't really talk about the XFL. You don't.
No, they don't have to. And
they don't have to. So
there's history here though too, right? They didn't talk about the AFL. They didn't talk about the WFL when it was had a lot of press and money being thrown around.
And the only league they've ever acknowledged is the CFL, because the commissioners have stated they still want a strong CFL.
Yeah, the thing though is that the NFL doesn't have to do anything until they do.
Yeah.
So, I'm not trying to throw rocks at the NFL. I mean, it's an amazing phenomenon in American and frankly world sports, right? There's plenty of opportunity still for international, right? We all remember the World League of American Football that has begotten, a bunch of interest in American football in European and Mexican markets. I think there's absolutely, I mean, if soccer can be globalized to the United States, vice versa for American football, I'm pretty sure. That said, though, I worry about, and this is for lots of sports, but the NFL, prime among them, about money, too much, right? Private equity now being part of the ownership mix. Too much money chasing too few franchises. I worry about clearly from a lot of the conversations that we've been lucky to have, things like the pensions and CTE and the physical frailty of players as they get older, and the still not understood enough. I mean, I just read an article today about Irv Cross, former Philadelphia Eagle and NFL Today.
Yeah, what did I miss? I haven't seen that.
It was an article on ESPN.com about his wife talking about the results from I forget what medical facility. He and his family donated his brain upon passing to have it looked at, and he was in stage 4 CTE.
Wow.
And his wife documents the last number of years were just, a complete abandonment of who he was and all of his faculties and that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And I don't know how much more evidence you need.
Right.
And I'm sure a lot of players kind of know about this going in, but I'm sure a whole lot more don't, or worse, see the dollar bills. And it's like, I'm going to go for it. It's my only chance. I'm still young. There's so much, so I don't know. I mean, it's just the NFL feels in some respects too big to fail. It's a juggernaut and yet ripe for a fall of some sort.
Well,
And
I described it to somebody here as to what the NFL is. And I go, the NFL for Americans is a certain segment of us, and I include myself, that it's kind of like a drug. It fills a void. It keeps us engaged. The NFL has figured out, with fantasy football, with gambling, with merchandising. I mean, I fell in love with football and pro sports because of NFL films. Now, way back when, we didn't know about the issues and everything. So as we're going forward now here, I mean, we're almost to the midway point here. Oh, we're getting there. Or we're a quarter way into the 21st century. And the question is, how does the NFL adapt? And the NFL, let's face it, they dodged a huge bullet in Cincinnati with what happened on the field there, and the recovery later on. And I'm sorry, I'm having the players name.
Yeah, but the question is not if, but when the next time that kind of thing happens, and we need to monitor his health going forward,
right.
and how much of that was influenced by concussive types of things and just other kinds of injuries and all that kind of. It's about as American as apple pie. And there is a trend going on in sports generally. There is this massive inflation of investment across the board. The NFL leading the valuation parade on the totem pole of value. And we were joking about it before. I mean, there's plenty of ESPN Ocho Sports out there that are, they're like 2 now major professional pickleball leagues, 3 actually.
Wow, I didn't know that.
There are
I did not know that.
There are 4 apparently real volleyball leagues coming. I think volleyball is ripe for another shot at the pro game. But 4 leagues when there are none now.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, and look, we've had plenty of historical conversations about the soccer was a great example of that. In the late 60s, coming off the 1966 World Cup, we had 3 professional leagues that wanted to start up in 1967. 3 when there were 0 the year before. That melded into 2. They couldn't agree. One got official blessing from FIFA, the other didn't, and they both launched in the same year. And then by the next year, they've merged into a single league. And then by the year after that, 1969, they were down to 5 teams. I mean, it's just like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I also don't know how much this money's going to last.
Right.
Private equity is looking for places to put money into, and sports, because of its scarcity.
Yeah.
But I worry about, I'm not trying to be the old man yelling at the clouds here. So
no, that's me.
Listeners, stop. You can stop. You can yell at your devices all you want, but ask yourself this. Number one, if you just wanted to go to an NFL football game, ask yourself how much that costs and how you're going to get that ticket or group of tickets and parking and all that kind of stuff. It is exorbitantly expensive. It is absolutely not in the province of the quote unquote average fan. So I think there may be a little bit of, and I think pro sports generally is getting into that category, right?
Yeah.
Even baseball is arguably still accessible because you can at least go to an afternoon game somewhere,
right.
And sit in the grandstands. And there's 82 games in your home market to go to. So there tends to be plenty of inventory, but this scarcity is what's driving the valuations. And then people who recognize, it's like getting a medallion. Well, basically when taxis were a restricted thing, it was like getting a medallion in Manhattan for your cab.
Right.
They only made so many of them. Right.
Yeah.
That's what artificially inflated the prices and stuff. I don't know. I just, number one, how much is too much, right? Major League Soccer, we're pushing on 30 teams now. Yeah. I'm the biggest soccer fan there is. Do we have enough talent in this country? World Cup, notwithstanding, to I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I just, it's getting more expensive. How many leagues can we support? And it feels bubbly to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there's only so much money to go around. And again, it's like with football, spring football. I mean, how much out there? I mean, at some point, these leagues need to make a profit to survive. But it goes to what you were saying. Just so much. It feels like a bubble.
And television and so one big thing that's happening literally as we record this, right, is the implosion of the regional sports network model.
Right. Here in the United States. And I'm glad we're talking about that because I wanted to get into TV and streaming because this is a whole area that I know nothing about other than what I read in the newspaper. So that's why I'm glad we're having, or what I see on TV and read. So that's why I'm glad I'm talking to you because so going back to what you were saying, the implosion of regional sports networks.
It's a legacy of the cable television model, right? Or pay television, right? Where, in your local markets, these regional sports networks, in some cases, there are two of them, like in Chicago, two in New York, largely centered around baseball, hockey, and the NBA. Mm-hmm. And they are cash cows, have been. They are an outsized portion of the model's brilliant, right? Because it's like for every cable or satellite subscriber, you bake that into the basic package. Mm-hmm. And it's the most expensive channel in your package, whether you watch it or not.
I did not know that.
And you have to take it. And despite pushback from cable operators wanting to make it an optional add-on, the model only works when you embed it into a nice fat monthly fee that is paid for by everybody, regardless if they watch it or not. And that is the lion's share of where a lot of player salary revenue goes to. Yes, there's national money, but there's also local, regional money that comes through these regional sports networks that, for baseball in particular, but to a similar extent, NHL and NBA franchises as well, depends on that. Those are the predominant ways most people watch most games of the sport, is through the regional sports networks. The outlier to that is, wait for it, the NFL, right? They years ago nationalized and pooled their television rights so that all 32 teams? 32 teams get equal share of that pie, right? Baseball and NBA and NHL differ in that market size actually matters. That's why the Yankees tend to be paying more for their players than others, because they make disproportionately more in media revenue because they're in the largest media market in the country versus, say, Milwaukee, which kind of has to do it different ways and not necessarily rely on that kind of money. But I think it's flying right in the face of what's happening to the manner by which most people in the United States are now consuming television. And increasingly, that is not through a cable or satellite package, a bundle. It's now streaming first, and maybe only, depending on how old you might be. And I think if you want to see where the future of televised sports is going to go, I think it's going to be one step boldly in the future and one step curiously in the past. The future is where folks like Major League Soccer are. So you may not be a soccer fan, but I'm really curious if you do get Apple TV Plus.
I do. I am a soccer fan. I've always watched soccer. I've always enjoyed it, and I actually have a team here in
The J League?
In the J League second division.
Nice.
Fagiano Okayama is the J League team here. So they're 2 games in. They're 1-0-1. So I got a team to follow and start to learn about Japanese. I always learn about culture through sports, so it's perfect. It's perfect.
Love the J League. The J League was MLS before MLS. It's great.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, that's a whole. Yeah, you're right, definitely.
But MLS though is they in doing their deal, their revolutionary deal with Apple, literally now owns and produces and solely distributes its stuff nationally. Right? They were trying to replicate or go down the regional sports realm, and they found that the broadcasts and the quality and the commitment was varied. It was all over the place depending on the market. Some did it really well. Many more others treated it as sort of a bastard stepchild or didn't put a lot of production efforts into it.
Yeah, like Chicago Fire in Chicago.
I agree. Like there's no English language radio for Chicago Fire games. It hasn't been ever. I mean, I've always found that to be perplexing. But now, I mean, for better or for worse, the league now controls it all. We can argue about, well, let's see. I will tell you, I was fascinated by the first weekend's worth, and you can get it wherever you are in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you're there
are no geo restrictions.
Correct. And you can choose different audio and all that kind of stuff. So that nationalization of those media rights now will uniformly go to all of those teams. So they don't have to worry about building their own local media businesses nearly as much anymore. They can focus on selling tickets and branding and all that kind of stuff. The past, however, is interesting and ironic because as the cable bundle starts to shard away, and as younger audiences don't even know what a subscription service like cable is or what it even means anymore. There's actually this sort of quaint notion that broadcast television stations in particular, could step in and become the new local sports hubs, at least for wide scale in-market distribution, right? Where you take a smattering of games, maybe 10 or 12 games, and feature them on over-the-air television, just sell them as advertising. And at least you get reach that way. It's a nice promotional vehicle. Yeah. And you stream the rest. And that's exactly what the LA Clippers have been doing.
Okay.
They took, I think, like 13 or 14 of their games, put them on one of the local stations there, and they use it as a promotional vehicle to tease out and remind people that they're around and encourage them. And it's great for branding because it gives them a lot of reach. So I think you're going to see combinations of broadcast TV and streaming where the national economics for the major packages go through streaming, and then the rest are kind of done sort of on a local broadcast thing. Again, NFL is kind of the exception to that rule. Right. But I think you're going to see, and I'll give you one last hint. Everything goes through an app. And if you want to see the best expression of how apps really work, check out the NBA's new app. It feeds all of the television, all the streaming through that app, and it knows, it will suss out whether you are subscribed to or not a certain package or have the authenticated rights to watch stuff, right?
Oh, okay.
And if you are, everything gets lit up and you'll get all these extra bonus feeds and all that kind of stuff. If not, you'll get promoted to purchase through the app to upgrade, either for that game or for the season and that kind of stuff. So I think you see a lot more flexibility and a lot more, and again, the NFL has really perfected the idea of centralized national rights that benefits everybody.
Right.
I think you're going to see more of that, less regionalization. And I think you're going to see streaming and local broadcast actually create a nice new mix of stuff. How the XFL and these challenger leagues fit into that, I'm not so sure. There's a reason why they're on the places that they are now, because they're not getting paid, the XFL. It's literally just they're essentially getting distribution for free for production costs.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask you because I'm able to watch the XFL over here on ESPN Plus, but the problem is ESPN Plus is geo-blocked. So I have to go to a VPN, and thank God I've got a good VPN provider that I haven't had any issues tuning into any of the games that I watch.
It's interesting. I'm surprised. I wonder where those international rights went for the XFL. Maybe they just haven't.
That's a good question. I mean, I'm being it's been a learning experience since I got here how to watch. I got here during football season, so first thing I learned was not all VPNs are created equal. So had to go to bought the NFL International Game Pass. Well, I could only watch that in Japan. So that means if I turn my VPN on and it had me located in the States, I couldn't watch the NFL International Game Pass. But the NFL International Game Pass allows me for $100 a year to see every game. And you compare that to what the NFL Sunday ticket costs in the States. And you realize, people in America are getting robbed because I can watch. It's just the economic. The NFL has figured out how to make money off of all of us pretty easily.
But the irony of the NFL though is they are the ones almost single-handedly keeping broadcast television alive. I mean, if you take away the NFL, and the broadcasters know it.
Yeah.
The only reason that broadcast stations and broadcast networks the NFL is really the big time prop. And what the NFL realizes is not only that they get paid a pretty penny because broadcasters are desperate to keep something of value that they can, if that goes away, a lot of the broadcasting industry will suffer very, very quickly. Yeah. That's how entwined they are. But here's the kicker. It also gives the NFL probably the broadest reach of any sports league out there because it is so universally available. Now, Amazon Prime's in the mix. Yeah, ESPN is in the mix. Yeah, I have to pay my cable operator if I want to get my broadcast signal through my television set. But literally, broadcast television, here for you youngins out there, it's actually free. You can actually put up an antenna and get it for free. That's how it was designed. And frankly, how laws are set up to allow those to actually happen. Now, business has evolved and changed, but it's a reach vehicle for the NFL. And they are expert at reach. They're everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
And
you're ubiquitous.
Every network, et cetera. So, that is a model. It's a template, and everybody is absolutely jealous of it and wants to somehow replicate it in its own. And you got to give the NFL credit. They did this years ago by pooling their rights.
Right.
They benefited everybody so that Jacksonville got just as much money as Jerry Jones in Dallas. And if you want to find other ways to make money in your market beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the NFL knows how to make, and that's something they have perfected. It's how to make money.
And they brought parity to the league too. It's not like the Yankees every year, right?
Well, and also too, I mean, with the NFL network, I mean, it's the NFL football. The NFL itself is a year-round thing. I mean, we're rolling in here, getting ready for what we've got. Really, we had free agency, and now we're going to be rolling into the draft. And next thing you know, we're going to be talking about the next thing. And before you know it, hey, it's kickoff. They've created. It's fascinating to see how much it's evolved, especially since we were kids. You think about it. Back in the 70s, when we were kids, Sunday? And on every Sunday at 3, pretty much knew the Cowboys or the Steelers were going to be on one of the channels. But here we are. But here we are now,
Yeah, look,
living in the future.
I also think there's saturation, right? Because now you've got a Thursday night game, you've got Sunday afternoon, you've got Sunday night, you've got Monday night, you've got in December, you've got Saturday games.
Right.
Now on Thanksgiving, you've got 3 games. There's these morning games now in Europe. It is,
and we haven't even talked about college ball.
Right. It's all, respect. It's too much. It's really,
I agree with
dilutes it. And Premier League's doing the same thing. There's a dilution there. And at some point, the NFL is going to get caught in all of that. For now, it's green field, but
right.
It's too much. I honestly believe it's too much.
Yeah. I mean, I agree 100% with you.
Scarcity helps sell stuff, right? I mean, keep it scarce so that people generate interest.
Yeah, it does. Well, listening to you talk though about the regional networks and bringing over the air broadcast, it gives me hope that I'm going to see the Cubs on WGN again next time I'm in town.
Well, that's a sore subject, right? I mean, yeah.
Oh, Jack Brickhouse is probably still rolling over in his grave.
So quick Chicago's thing. I mean, the irony is that the Marquee Sports Network, which is the second, literally launched 3 years ago just to be the broadcaster of the Cubs, a regional sports network. It is bereft of any other programming during the rest of the year.
Yeah.
One has to pay for it regardless. And it is co-owned by the company that rolled up about 70% of the other regional sports networks, now called Bally Sports. A company called Sinclair, which is a big broadcaster in the United States.
I've heard of
Sinclair. But you also have heard that the RSN business that they bought 4 years ago, including the rights to create Marquee, is essentially going to declare bankruptcy in another week or two.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah, which is hastening the collapse of this regional sports network thing. So my point is maybe a little bit of an air of hope that you might be able to see some games on Channel 9 WGN here in Chicago, and maybe somehow otherwise as well. But I think Major League Baseball is going to be is just about ready to do the NFL thing and nationalize their rights. I think that's next.
Yeah, and that's we could go on forever. I mean, baseball is a whole nother subject, just talking about TV and media and everything, and even old defunct leagues. And of course, we'd have to go way back for that. So Tim, if you could let everybody know here where to find you, how to listen, and anything else, your website too, because you've got a great website. The website is, your website is one of the best companion websites to any podcast that I know that's out there.
Well, if you're still awake, thank you for listening. Good Seats Still Available. That's the name of the podcast. It's literally and figuratively wherever you get podcasts. So would you follow or subscribe or whatever? There's probably no platform out there across the planet where we're not available. So you have no excuse, frankly. The website, as mentioned, thank you, is goodseatsstillavailable.com. Make sure you spell the with all the S's in there properly. We post every episode there as well. We also publish through YouTube, so you can see them there too. We want to download them that way. There's no excuse not to find them. You should be able to find them with ease.
Just a quick Google search.
And I would hope there's a bunch of things that to me, this is a foundation. I think there's a bunch of other things we can do. I really would like to do rehab a newsletter a little bit and try to get more involved in literally newsworthy things in and around the realm of defunct and forgotten sports.
Mm-hmm.
As I said earlier, hinted at earlier, they're always making more. There's always a story. There's always a threat of relocation. There's always something going on about a new league that'll come and go. I just would like to be more regularly helpful in surfacing those stories for the listener audience, but also, frankly, to just get ideas for future episodes.
Yeah.
And we may have a few other sort of things. I'd like to do some live interviews and events and stuff. So there's a whole bunch of things I'd like to do if given the time. But I appreciate anybody who has listened, who has not listened before, but will give a listen. Again, as I said earlier, it's a niche. But if it strikes your fancy, I think you will enjoy it immensely, because I learn every single episode. And if you even have a passing interest in a particular sport, or you vaguely remember a team or a certain league that you think happened in your consciousness, but you can't put a finger on it. If we haven't gotten to it yet, we probably will. And once we stumble across something that tickles your fancy, I guarantee you'll find it interesting and hopefully, God forbid, a little enjoyable too.
Okay. And what do you got? Any previews as to what's coming up on the next episode?
You'll just have to stay tuned.
Okay.
We spin the wheel.
That's what we call a tease.
We try not
That's what we call a tease.
We try not to tip off, but you can be assured that there'll be plenty of football fun and frivolity to come in the months ahead for sure. So keep a listen, football fans, for sure.
All right, Tim. Thank you very much for joining me. And we'll be talking here after we press the stop button here. You'll update me on the Chicago election results. And for everybody who's listening, and and I know I have family out there too that are now listening, so I do appreciate that. But on behalf of Scott and myself, Tim, thank you very much for joining us. And all three of us now are mutual friends, so I know both you and I are wishing Scott well with what's going on with his family right now. And for everybody who's listening, thank you very much, and we will be talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hi, this is Joe Ziemba, the host of When Football Was Football, here on the Sports History Network. I'm very pleased to announce that I will be partnering with the Sports History Network to give away 2 copies of my latest book called Bears vs. Cardinals, the NFL's Oldest Rivalry. To enter, just head over to the following link, sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways. We hope you'll enjoy the numerous stories in the book, which is largely based on the newly released Dutch Sterneman collection at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Dutch was the co-owner of the early Chicago Bears with George Halas and kept correspondence, financial records, and scouting reports, which now allow us to peek into the management of an NFL club during the first few years of the league's existence. Along the way, we'll meet unusual gridiron characters from years gone by, including a quarterback who could throw the ball farther behind his back than he could throwing it forward, a Bears lineman who was such a good tavern fighter that he decided to enter the boxing universe, and a Cardinals halfback who gave up the NFL rushing title by deciding to not show up for his team's final game of the season. And can we forget the time the Al Capone mob interrupted a Bears-Cardinals game? The new book was fun to research, and I hope you will enter our free contest today. Once the winners are selected, we'll be in touch regarding shipping as well as to inscribe the book personally for you. This might make a perfect gift for Mother's or Father's Day, or simply add it to your own personal collection. Once again, enter by visiting sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways. Thank you and good luck.